there's no good time to be a Russian dissident. But the latest tactic from Russian law enforcement to silence dissent is actually pretty egregious, even by Russian standards. But we're going to talk even more about how Russia uses its law to create a two-tiered system to make sure that critics of the Kremlin never get to see the light of day, and favored insiders make sure that they have a clear shot at corruption. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's take a look. So, the latest Russian tactic is called a carousel arrest. This is a Russian tactic for keeping, essentially, dissidents in pretrial confinement is the best analog. See, here in the United States, if you do something pretty egregious, like you're like a family annihilator or something, or you commit like a triple homicide, well, the law says, listen, you're not tried and convicted yet, but we're going to keep you in pretrial confinement because you are so dangerous that we're not going to let you out. And right, this is sort of the alternative to bond, right? Where they say, okay, if you post up a little money and promise you'll show up for your court date, we'll hold the money and you can go back to your house and like turn off your stove or whatever. But in Russia, this pretrial confinement is actually being used to keep dissidents from ever seeing the light of day, even without a conviction. See, a random street musician named Diana Loganova has been placed in custody 3 times in a row since last month. This is an 18-year-old singer and her bandmates from the group Stop Time went viral, you might recall, a month or two ago, performing a track by an exiled anti-war artist to large crowds in the center of St. Petersburg. But they went a little too viral, caught the attention of authorities, and then were arrested by 10 to 13 days for the crime of, quote, organizing a rally. Worth noting, again, this is sort of like being arrested for protesting without a permit, something that is, again, sort of a perfunctory charge. But the key thing is that they weren't actually sentenced. They were just arrested and held in pretrial detention, essentially, while the authorities decided if they were going to charge her for the egregious crime of organizing a rally. But when their pretrial sentences expired, they didn't go free. They were just let out of the cell, immediately rearrested for a new crime, right? And then the clock restarted, letting them stay even longer in detention. This has become the latest example in what's known in Russia as a carousel arrests, meaning that you just get arrested, let out, arrested, let out, arrested, let out, never actually getting off the carousel and never actually having to launch a full criminal proceeding. This is actually, unfortunately, a tactic that we sometimes see even in the United States recently, especially targeting protesters against law enforcement or deportation operations, right? Protest is protected activity, free speech, protected activity. But what you see often is that individuals that protest a little too hard or a little too angrily at ICE or Border Patrol, those individuals will get arrested and they'll be hauled off to jail. But then a judge will almost immediately set them free, as even prosecutors are refusing to even file charges against something that is so clearly a free speech action. But that person who is still got punished, right? Law enforcement getting arrested often aggressively by Border Patrol and ICE, which, by the way, not their authority. Like, that's not their job. Arresting protesters, not their role. Still, these guys get arrested, they get roughed up, they get put in jail. And remember, if those people are broke or their friends and family don't know where they are, it can actually take a long time to get them out. And if you spend 2 or 3 nights in jail, it's not uncommon for people to miss shifts and lose their job. I mean, what happens if you get arrested and your kid's at daycare? Like, good fucking luck, you know? So those are real punishments that are inflicted on those people. So that's sort of this is the Russian equivalent of that, right? In fact, one rights group recorded almost 60 carousel arrests of opposition politicians, activists, and just ordinary citizens, right? It's a reminder from the state to say, listen, don't try to, the law exists to punish you, because the people that do this, right, they're never going to face any consequences. In one spokesman for this opposition group said, quote, political repression is only partly about the rule of law, and to a large extent, repressions are the result of a political decision. What is the decision and how it was made? We do not know, right? Because both authoritarian governments and representative governments have laws, but the question is, what is the law used for? And that, I think, is the takeaway here. So here's some examples of ways in which the Russian law is used against, well, people doing some of the most innocuous things. For example, the developer of the game Stalker, right, notably a Ukrainian-developed game, has been declared an undesirable in Russia. Nothing spooky about that name. The agency, this is the Russian Prosecutor General's office, said that the GSC Game World, that's the company that made Stalker, sponsors the Ukrainian Armed Forces, transferred $17 million to the Ukrainian Army in 2022 alone. Moreover, even more egregiously, the prosecutor's office claims the developer contributes to the formation of the image of Russia as an aggressor state and distributes materials that discredit the country. They said, quote, in 2024, the organization released a computer game promoting Ukrainian narratives and containing aggressive Russia-phobic content. FYI, guys, Russia went into Ukraine, not the other way around. Russia was the aggressor state. This is objective truth. But again, objective truth never got in the way of an authoritarian cracking down on people free speeching a little too hard. In fact, the Ministry of Justice, this is the Russian Ministry of Justice, fined journalists for simply retweeting a study that found that 76% of senior officials in the Russian government have relatives in government or state-controlled industries. Meaning that this study was actually part of a study, what he described as a study on Russia's ruling class, recounted what he considered three key facts from the study. He didn't provide a link to the study itself. But law enforcement still arrested him, saying that technically he participated in the activities of an undesirable organization. So again, this is just literally just repeating objective truth is now seen as being deeply problematic. And again, this is why I get so disturbed about the U.S. government when we see similar things, right? You may notice that recently there have been huge funding cuts and actually political purges from the civil service of people who simply cite the wrong kinds of studies, even in their personal accounts, right? Or even people that aren't sufficiently sad about the death of a podcaster are also finding themselves being forced out of government positions, despite, again, the Constitution saying that Congress can make no law abridging freedom of speech. There's an asterisk, actually. If you look at the very bottom, it says, unless your president's favorite podcaster dies, then everyone has to be sad. So, again, or in Russia, unless a study finds that the pay-to-play system is just a little too entrenched, then it's a little asterisk. It says, then you don't have free speech. You also have, of course, a pro-Kremlin political scientist, Sergei Markov, charged with foreign agent crimes, likely for failing to report himself to the Ministry of Justice, which is insane because a classic authoritarian conundrum. In July 2025, Markov participated in a global media forum in Azerbaijan where the president of Azerbaijan spoke. The problem is that Moscow and Baku, the Azerbaijani capital, had a pretty bad falling out. And so as a result of that fallout, it went from being Azerbaijan as a trusted friend of Russia to now they are a Russian enemy. Well, Sergei Markov didn't get the memo in time because he made a mistake. He didn't cancel his trip or just refute the trip with sufficient contrition, right? How could I have been duped by my enemy, Azerbaijan? I thought they were a friend, but no, I forgot to get my marching orders from the Kremlin. And the problem with this sort of stuff is that some of these people are dissidents, or some of them are barely even dissidents, right? Again, citing a study about concentration of wealth and power in Russia. But you look at someone who's even a pro-Kremlin blogger, and all the other pro-Kremlin bloggers are going to look and say, listen, all that dude did was go attend an extremely low-level forum in a country that at the time was considered a Russian ally. They go, well, when will I, accidentally support the country in the wrong way? When will I support a Kremlin ally and then get turned around? And as it turns out, I was never a Kremlin ally at all. This is the problem, right? This is the fundamental conundrum that these insiders often find themselves in, which is that you cannot maintain ideological purity when the definition of ideological purity is constantly changing. But this only applies, by the way, guys, to Russia's unconnected, the poor. Those inside the Kremlin can never be right. They can never be wrong, rather. Nothing they do is wrong. Because the head of the central bank literally is saying, listen, we're really sorry that we started blocking transactions in a fight against fraud. We stopped fraudulent transactions a little too hard. The number of fraud complaints has significantly dropped. She says, I hope this is a trend. But at the same time, she says the complaints about unjustified account freezes have increased. In other words, in our fight against fraud, we've accidentally stopped a little too many fraudsters. Clients weren't always given an explanation as to why their funds were frozen, right? Now, Russian federal laws allow banks to block cards transfers from clients' accounts to combat fraud, as well as some cases of suspected money laundering and terrorist financing. And the funny thing is that a legitimate anti-fraud effort accidentally exposed too many powerful people as committing fraud. And literally, the central banker is like, this worked, but too many people are upset that their fraudulent transactions have been stopped. And accidentally outing the Kremlin and insiders as committing fraud so widespread that they have to stop. Well, that probably, Elvira Nabiullina, probably not long for her position, because no matter how hard you work for Vladimir Putin, you'll never be, there is no loyalty other than to himself. Anyway, guys, thanks so much. Become a member at Combat Vet News, support the channel, or just hit that big old become a member button below, and you too can get access to uncensored combat footage that drops twice a week, including thanks to Alfred Chesky, Alan Knutson, Christine Schumann, Dan M., Deborah Oppenheimer, and all of our Lieutenant Tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.